Ashling's Holistic Health Show. I'm Aisling Fitzgibbon, holistic nutrition coach and occupational therapist. This show brings you the best tools and ideas for you to take your health into your own hands, your true place of power. So hi everyone, thank you for joining me on Ashling's Holistic Health Show. Today I have a very special guest, Thomas Sheridan, who I've known for many years. Thomas is an author. He's written a very fascinating book about psychopaths. He'd be well known for that book, and that was the work that really introduced me to Thomas. And I met Thomas during my whole journey as an activist, and he was very instrumental in my whole journey. So I felt I wanted to reach out with him and share his vast knowledge and his creative outlook on how we can all as individuals move through our own journey. So thanks so much, Thomas, for joining me today.
I'm delighted to be here, Aisling. Thank you.
So so basically, I suppose just to kind of start off where we kind of finished, I suppose last time I spoke with you I was kind of in the height of my activist mode, and I think obviously you've kind of seen that I've journeyed out of that, but I think that a lot of people are still of the opinion that, you know, as if we oppose and we kind of protest and we go against the way the system is, that will somehow eventually lead to change. And I suppose that's where I was, but I've moved out of that. But I feel that you have a very unique perspective on that is really beneficial for people to hear.
Well, activism is a kind of a self-hexing process, even though it's driven by good desires and, you know, honorable aims. Ultimately, you're focusing your energy on your enemy and you're giving it to them, and it's like being in an abusive relationship, but you're in an abusive relationship with the control system. And you know, it's if you sit there all the time going, you know, please Mr. Government Man, do this, they'll ignore you. If you say, you better do this, Mr. Government Man, I'm really angry, they love it, because what you've done is you've acquiesced your power to them by putting them in a power of superiority. You're demanding, you know, them to bestow some kind of benefit or some kind of need upon you because you see them as an enormous power, and you've self-hexed yourself into believing that you're just like an insect, someone who's completely irrelevant, and you're desperate to be heard. Now this is a kind of black magic when you think about it, because what you're really doing is you're throwing away all the energy to a behemoth, a monster that doesn't actually care that you exist, other than that you can feed its ego in a way by validating its power and its power function. Now this brings up two different things. You will find then that you create a division, and the division is you and your people plus the ones who look upon it like on the outside like it's a football match or it's a boxing event, and they choose the side, one side of the other, and they'll inevitably choose the side of the one they think is going to win on a subconscious level, and that's the government, that's the huge corporations, and therefore they will become cheerleaders in some kind of weird default subconscious way of the control system, when it means absolutely nothing in the scheme of their own lives. It's just purely a need to support who they think is their leader. So it always in the end feeds the boss, it feeds the oppressor, and you need that energy for so many other things, because the one thing they don't want anyone doing is expressing their individuality and living an autonomous lifestyle. Yeah.
And I actually feel, because it just brings me back to that moment where we had an event in Whelan's back in September of 2014. And I remember just before, like, you know, we had organized and we had so many people coming, and we had Paul Connett coming over from America, who's done the Fluoride campaign for like 21 years, and so much energy had gone into it. But I actually felt like completely in that moment, just so defeated and so heartbroken. Just like, I felt so powerless. It was just like, oh my God, like literally my life force energy is gone. And I was like, I cannot go another footstep in this direction. I just knew it. I knew, like, it was like all my instincts came up to say, stop what you're doing, you're actually going to basically like almost die. I felt like all my life force was leaving.
Yeah, well, it's back to the analogy of the bad relationship. You're in a
Mm.
bad relationship with someone who's an alcoholic or a drug addict. It doesn't matter how much you try. Eventually, a point comes to the point where you say, I've got to take care of me. It's not happening. It's not working. All the best intentions in the world are not bringing it to fulfillment.
Yeah.
And that's it too. Also, another thing, Aisling, this is a very important one. We're brought up to believe that we can have these changes instantaneously in our lifetime. And if you look at the history of the world, it's
Yeah.
taken centuries for the simplest things to have actually come to fruition.
Yeah.
So it's that's another thing. They say, you know, if it's loads of movies and TV shows and pop culture heroes who, you know, they protest against City Hall and they get it right away and they're celebrated as heroes. But those types are usually extremely rare. And if they are, they've only been given that gift by the power system in order so the power system can say, look, aren't we great? We gave it to the people.
Yeah.
And it eats your energy alive, because that's exactly what it is. There's no other way of putting it. You were being eaten alive by something you could not change, even though you'd put this energy into it. The energy wasn't returning. Everything
No.
is everything's an exchange of energy. A light bulb will only light if the positive and negative wires are flowing the same amount of, you know, current in and out. The electrons are flowing equally through the positive and the negative. When you don't have the flow back, you have nothing. You're not grounded, and that's actually so dangerous. A lot of people don't realize it, because it can make you age really fast. It can make you really unhealthy, and it can also, you know, that's what they want. They want you to just keep protesting and protesting and protesting until you're an empty shell.
Absolutely. And actually that's so interesting, because when you were saying that about like putting out energy and not getting it back, because I actually did feel, especially when I made, I suppose, a huge inroads, it was like I just like all of my life force energy was going out, but because it wasn't being replenished, I was becoming incredibly ungrounded, to the point that I wouldn't be able to, at some point, even like be able to stand up. I'd actually just be like taken out physically.
Oh yeah, because your
Yeah.
psychic energy is directly related to your, like, you know, you can spend all the time in the world talking about health and food and everything like this, but your psychic energy is directly related to all that. If the
Yeah.
underlying psychic energy is not there, it does not matter what the rest of you is, because you could have the best diet in the world, the best exercise regime, the healthiest person in the world, but if your psychic energy is not, if your psychic integration is not secure, well, the rest is just like a new paint job on a house that's foundations are falling apart.
Yeah, that's very interesting. But I think a lot of people out there will relate, because again, there's new waves of people finding information out, and they're on the internet and they're going down the rabbit hole. And I suppose I really want to kind of put this message out through this podcast of that, you know, I think it serves a purpose in a way, because it's kind of the first stage, but it's like, you don't stay there. It's a trap, and you have to be aware that you're not meant to siphon out your life force to this thing that's basically going to eat you up.
Yeah,
Ultimately.
you jump in the game for a while and you jump out. It's like you can't be a teenager forever. You know,
Exactly.
if you look at kind of like metaphysical, sort of like esoteric ideas, they all follow the same function. Like you look at the tarot cards, for example. You begin with the fool. The fool steps off into the abyss, all
Yeah.
idealistic, all, you know, well-meaning, and then it's sort of a kind of a level of success appears along the way. You know, it gets to a point, and then you have the clock striking midnight, and then you start to fall into the dark night of the soul. And
Yeah.
if you haven't done the groundwork earlier on, or you haven't jumped out and stopped being the fool and start to be like, a sort of a more internalized version of yourself, then you will find that you will fall off that cliff rather than find a path to safety. And so
Yeah.
people, there's nothing wrong with someone saying, you know, let's go down and protest, because that's actually a good way of getting rid of frustrations and psychic energy. But a lot of people get this impression, and I see it over and over again, that somehow there's going to be a shift and everyone is going to join along with you. The sad fact is that's not going to happen. You'll find people who will actually be on the same wavelength as you. And, you know, we hear a lot of nonsense about the 100 monkeys and all this. It'll wake everybody up. It doesn't. If it does, it takes centuries. It doesn't happen in our lifetime. And that's another thing too. And that can be painful for people. This idea of like, I went to a march against Monsanto or whatever, and nobody cared. I stood up and I made a speech and nobody cared.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, that's because, I hate to say it, but most people are not really, ready for anything other than existence. That's just how it is. Just most people are just, when you scratch the surface, there isn't a whole lot in there. They don't think about anything. You're trying to wake up people that don't even know what waking up is, or don't even are aware that they're asleep.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's a big, huge problem. I'm sure you encountered that with the fluoride thing.
Yeah.
Why is fluoride a problem? It's this, that, and the other. But I've been drinking it for years and it hasn't bothered me.
Exactly.
Yes, but you do lots of things for years that will eventually kill you. And we're talking about intergenerational. It's like, oh, I don't know about that. And then you give them X Factor or something else, and they're completely bewildered and they run off into that world.
Yeah, exactly.
You just won't reach them. You can only go for the ones you can find.
Exactly. And that's where I've come to. And since relinquishing this whole idea of, oh, it has to happen now, or it has to happen in X amount of time, I've kind of given over the idea of when it has to happen. Because as you know, and as you've mentioned, things take time. It's like the whole thing with, say, the gay rights, whatever. Like, how long did that whole movement have, over since the 70s to present time? So it's like so many different historical things. It's like they're put in motion by some people, but it's like you're meant to pass it on to others. And as you say, the people who are meant to hear it will hear it, but it's like you can't be attached to, everyone has to listen, everyone has to be converted, because it just doesn't work that way.
No. If you look at like all the great sort of like epics of mythology and folklore, where you have like a hero or a heroine on a journey, they always follow the same format. They always they have this quest, they go on it. Now, mythology exists for a reason, because it's telling us about ourselves and our consciousness. And then they step off on a path. Along the way, they get help. They might meet a wizard. They might meet a witch. They might meet an elf or something. It's the same in every mythology. It's just different names for things. They'll encounter a trickster or a liar who will deceive them, a Loki-type character. And then, eventually, it always seems to come down to a showdown. And at the end of the showdown, they'll either slay a dragon or some kind of monster. But the reality is that the dragon or the monster is a reflection of what they have become on the journey. And the ultimate sacrifice at the end is them as a hero. They've really slain themselves. And that's the moral of the story. That you take yourself so far on this journey, and then you slay that hero or heroine.
Yeah.
And you accumulate, and then you become almost like a kind of a different kind, a different kind of character. Like you'd see like so many of the stories where you'd have wizards or druids in these mythology. They were previously the hero. They've become a kind of an almost like a secondary version of humanity, where they've actually had all those human experiences, but now they're working in the realm of consciousness. And it's mythology all over the world is exactly the same.
Oh my gosh, even though I know it's mythology, and as you say, it does describe our experience, but it's like, as you even say that, I can put myself into every stage of what you've just gone through. I'm like, tick, I've gone through all those parts. And it really is the kind of the like starting off in it. I never imagined that was what it was. I just thought simply I'm to help spread a message to health, and that's what I initially thought. But then it was just basically a journey that you're not even in control of. And I think the more you kind of just step out of your own way and allow it to happen, allow the process. It basically it leads you to where you're meant to evolve to. So
I bet you'll have more success with this campaign. Well, it's gone now, but with the fluoride issue now that you're not doing it, I know that sounds weird. I know that sounds weird, but what happens at this point now is a sort of like a kind of a story starts to develop where things don't operate according to a timeline, but they sort of like drift in and out of these potentials, and these opportunities drift in and out. And there's almost like a wisdom. You're almost like then become like an archivist or a monk or something, but it happens anyway. It's because what you've done is you've created a snowball and then you've rolled down the hill. Now that snowball is not going to stop. It's always going to keep on going. But anyone who knows like anything to do with a magical process, suppose you create a magical spell or you create a sigil or something, you immediately forget it. You forget it. You throw it away. It's gone. It's gone.
Yeah.
Because if you put your conscious focus on that, what happens is all the psychic energy and will needed to bring that into manifestation is interrupted because nothing is flowing to it because you're actually acting like a buffer towards it. So it's like in some ways, the girl against fluoride was really the girl for fluoride, not through any fault of their own. But that's the irony of it. That's you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
It's like I bet there was days when you thought, you know, if I never got involved in this, we'd probably be one step closer to having fluoride removed.
Yeah,
right?
Totally. I was like, literally, it was this whole kind of, I didn't realize it at the time, but what I learned later was the whole concept that you strengthen what you oppose. And I didn't have any, I thought, oh, I'm doing good, I'm pushing. But it was like, we were actually, it was like locking down all the loopholes. It was like, it just shut it down even further and gripped it in further.
Yeah, exactly. Because they exactly, that's a great way of putting it. They put up the defenses, they locked the castle gates, and they put archers on the tower. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also that's very interesting because I remember it was in 2012, just before, it was around the time of the whole Girl Against Fluoride, because that came through a story. Initially, it was a short story written by my mom on a full moon, just kind of came in, and I was like, oh, I'll be that girl. And it kind of started off as this kind of whole concept and then became like a real life campaign. But we actually went out to Skellig Michael, and I basically just like set out my intention, but it was very much like the whole process of being indirect, because I obviously didn't know what way it would happen, but it was like an indirect intention of just saying it is going to happen, just putting it out into the cosmos and stepping away from it. But at the same time, I had to kind of go through that process. I didn't know what I know now, but I think it was just it was meant to happen.
Experience, it's all part of the journey. It's how else would you have known? And there's two ways of looking at it. One, the Girl Against Fluoride allowed them to put the barriers up, but two, you wouldn't be where you are now with this kind of like retrospective insight about everything. It's also setting you up for the rest of your life in a more healthy kind of way, because now you have the experience, you have the proficiency, you know exactly how it works. So from this point on, it's whatever you'll attack it will be easier, because you'll know that you can't do that again. You can't change the world. You see, it's awful how we're raised when not all of us, but like a lot of kids we're raised by pop culture to believe we can change the world. We can't. Yeah. We can't. We can only change the world that we're directly connected to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that when you start to have that realization as well, you actually start to, I think, cultivate like that creative force that you have inside you. You're able to tap into that properly.
Oh, big time.
I think, I think that's really the key to everything is actually being able to find that and cultivate that in your own life.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling people for years I'm not interested in activism, and they used to look at me like I was some kind of traitor or something. Yeah. I said, I don't care. I said, I only care about myself and the ones I love. I can't help or affect anyone else directly. I can throw stuff out there. If people want to go for it, then let them go for it. But if they don't want to run with it, that's the end of it. I'm not getting involved. I'm not putting my name up there because it's not my job. And secondly, I know exactly how these bastards work. I was offered very early on the chance to go on the Pat Kenny show, late show, and I can remember when the intern called me up and says, "Would you do the Pat Kenny show?" So, and I says, "No." And the silence on the other end of the phone was like it was intense. And she goes, "This is an enormous opportunity for you. There's like 2 million live viewers, blah blah blah." And I said, "Don't care, because I don't want that. I don't want 15 minutes. I just don't want it. Thanks very much." Yeah. And that's they wanted me on there because they would have had some psychologist or psychiatrist from like Trinity or UCD who would have said, like, just torn me. I would have been made a laughing stock. It would have been like not a laughing stock, but it would have been like the Christians thrown to the lions in the Roman Forum. It would have been that. And like people were astounded when I said no. And I said, I just don't, because all I'm doing is not validating my work. I'm validating RTE, and I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what way that plans out for people. Not very nice, because I think I remember like starting off just being under the illusion that all of these media sources like RTE and the different radio shows, I was like, of course they'll share different things. And of course, once you send in, oh my gosh, was I rudely awoken to the fact that that is not the way the system operates.
Ministry of Propaganda. Even the small local regional news stations and papers are all Ministry of Propaganda as well. Journalists don't the university. No, I'm not going to put down all journalists, of course, but the university.
Apart from hot press are different. They're like in a different league altogether because they.
I know, but that's their job to be kind of like countercultural.
Yeah.
But they're also people who got into journalism through music and things like that. So it's a different kind of vibe. But the ones who wanted to be a hard-nosed hack in the newspapers, I mean, it's been shown time and time again. Like at the University College London, when they did the thing on the professions most likely to have psychopaths, journalists was number 2 or 3.
Oh, wow.
Because and this is when you look at the newspapers and you see how they destroy people's lives, celebrities' lives, say the most appalling things about them, attack their children. The way they will stick a camera into the face of a microphone into the face of a mother whose kid has just been killed. A normal person wouldn't do that, but a lot of journalists will. Now, they're also highly dependent upon governments. That's why they have us all calling in Ireland. This calling politicians by their first name does my head in. They're not our friends. They're not our mates. That's all a psyop. That's all a mind control program thing. They have us think they're our friends. They're not. They're friends of the journalists because they hang out in the same pubs and they hang out in the same places with them, but they're not our friends. And so that's like this kind of thing. And it's like, me and you growing up in Ireland, right? You have this kind of idea. We're just like a small country on the west of Europe. Our politicians are not so bad. And I can tell you, years ago, I was working this is in 2001, 2002. I came back to Ireland from America and I was working in marketing and putting a lot of kind of marketing and public relations, communications type work. And a lot of the clients of the company I was working for was the government. And I soon became aware of how incredibly dark government in Ireland is. It's quite dark and evil. And it's not necessarily politicians, it's things like senior civil servants and government appointed experts and things like this. Yeah. And it was quite a shock for me because I was kind of like thinking, sure, we're nothing here. Our government will actually probably be okay and easy going. But there was the same ruthlessness you would see in any other government of a larger country around the world.
But also it's interesting what you were saying about the whole point of like black magic and the mind control thing, because I felt like when I kind of moved out of the activism thing, I really wanted to discover how things work and how reality is constructed, and all these different questions were coming up in my mind. And it's like, I think that when I started to hear like what black magic was, like, do you know the definition of what black magic is?
Well, the most basic definition of black magic, and I know a lot of people don't like him, but you still have to respect that he knew what he was talking about, was Aleister Crowley. And he said that the definition of black magic is any magical path or any enhancement of consciousness that is not concerned with the development of the self. So that means you try to change somebody else, that's black magic. You try to not work on yourself. So that's why I said you were self-hexing yourself, because you were not working on Aisling Fitzgibbon, you were working on the girl against fluoride. You had created a daemon that was actually almost like your demonic twin, and you were feeding that, and you were keeping that alive at the expense of your own conscious development.
Absolutely.
Inadvertently, of course you didn't know. You didn't know
exactly.
That.
No, but I actually
didn't mean that.
Yeah, I didn't mean that. Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, because it's like, because I did a training called Rune Mastery, and it's a lot of the metaphysical explanations I started to learn, and it was saying that, which I was quite shocked because I was like, oh my god, I've been doing so much black magic. It was like, what if you try to affect change, try to affect the reality, the environment directly? That's black magic. Like directly, like I'm trying to force, because my individual self is trying to inflict my will upon the universe.
Yeah, that's why I've always said there's no difference between an idealist and a fascist. It's the same thing.
Mm.
An
Yeah,
idealist wants to make it the world perfect in their idealistic view. Hold on a
yeah,
second, what about all the people that don't want that? And that's
exactly.
fascism. So it's the
Yeah.
same thing. So it's like, yeah, exactly. That's what it is. The only magical path that's really worth anything is the development of the self.
Hmm.
Because if you can solve that, if you can work on that, you've solved everything else from that point going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So you were involved in black magic. I hate to say it, but you were. But
Yeah,
but
exactly.
not
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
not
but
deliberately.
the only one you were self hexing, the only one you're hexing you was yourself.
I know, yeah, because I remember actually, like, we went on holidays, like, kind of not long after that. I remember just feeling like I lost all gravity. I found it really hard to just to walk, and I was just like, what have I done? What have I done? What have I done? And then that kind of led me, like, to the next juncture, really, of whoever needed to appear on my path just appeared and was like, oh, come this way. There's another way, which is basically the whole self development and what you're saying. Like, that's where I'm at now with everything.
Yeah, exactly. You also would have attracted a lot of actually I saw them, a lot of
Mm,
vampires who want to
yeah.
tap into your thing.
Hmm.
I remember like a few events that we did together,
Yeah.
and I could see them. They were like demons came out of the shadow, and the same ones every time. And all
Yeah.
they wanted to do was ride on the coattails and let you take all the bullshit, let
Hmm.
you take all the flack, but
Yeah.
they could actually spin their own little agenda on top of that. It was
Hmm.
extremely. Some of them had an extremely dark energy. I wouldn't even talk to them and look at them
Yeah.
about around them. And
Hmm.
it was like you were the host and they were the parasite, and you get a lot of that crap going on as well.
Oh, definitely.
Uh,
And actually, that was probably the worst. No, I wouldn't say the worst part of it, because look, it was just the experience. But I think it was probably the most traumatic part, was that experience of the people. It wasn't even the government or the people that I was, being against them. It was actually the people that kind of came in almost in the guise of, like, trying to help me, but, like, basically being parasites.
yeah, exactly. That's another reason I don't like activism, because it's full of parasites.
Mm.
It's full of parasites who'll take they're everywhere. They've destroyed many a good man and woman, and
Yeah.
that's because they let them. That's because they let them. But it's
Yeah.
like like I have a reputation of taking no shit from nobody, and that's just how it is. I'm a nice guy. I'm a decent person. But
Mm.
if I suspect that anyone is trying to like lead me in any way, I won't. They won't even get a second chance. It's just how I have to be. It's just
Yeah.
how you. It doesn't mean I'm distant or I'm very approachable and everything. But if I
Hmm.
suspect that you're in any way running an agenda, you're out completely. And
Yeah.
that's the end of it, because it's just how you have to be. It's not
It is.
being, this is why I can't stand this whole thing of unconditional love and all this. I mean,
I
it's
know.
only, it's conditional. That's the end of it. It's conditional. That's
Yeah.
the end of it.
But actually, because it's,
There's nothing more conditional.
yeah, because it's like, I think that, say, part of the kind of archetype that I really developed in the campaign was my warrior self. But then the warrior can become very dysfunctional because it wants to take on everything, wants to battle everything. But then they actually say that the highest function of the inner warrior is actually, like, to stalk, like, other people, and what like what you're doing. You're like, that's your kind of inner warrior, is kind of saying, you're maintaining the parameter of yourself and your boundaries are intact, and you're all the time kind of being very aware of that in your interactions with other people.
Well, if you look at like history, like whether it was the berserkers of the Vikings or the samurai, a
Mm-hmm.
fight very rarely happened.
Mm.
A fight very rare. It would just be like the samurai would do two things. First, he would touch his sword, and that was a warning that
Mm-hmm.
he was not. It was one touch, and then it was two touch to say that the next time, if you don't step aside, I'm withdrawing the sword. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the real true way of the warrior. The warrior is not like waving the sword, screaming and shouting and cutting down every 5 minutes.
Mm.
Otherwise, they wouldn't survive. The
Yeah.
warrior's job is to be aware of the environment, just like a wild animal. And that comes back. That's a very ancient thing in human society. I mean, our brains have two hemispheres, but they're not. They're also not. They're not symmetrical. And
Mm.
the reason why they discovered it was not just symmetrical is because they discovered that in early human beings, say you were hunting a fish in a
Yeah.
lake, you had a spear. Well, you've got one part of your brain focused entirely on catching that fish, but you still need your perceptual awareness in case there's a saber-toothed tiger or a bear behind you. And that's how the warrior brain works. You know, it's like focused in the moment, but aware of the environment. But again, we're programmed from our kids to see TV shows and stupid movies, and you know, where the archetypes always constantly fight. You know, Laura Croft, she's always fighting and stuff like that. Well, it never happened in real life, and that brainwashed you as a kid, even though you think it's not. Yeah, that's the real way of a warrior. I mean, it's like, you know, it's what they say is like real heroes die in their bed of old age, and that's true. There's a lot of truth to that. You know,
they're not taking on every battle as if it's their own.
No, and sometimes you gotta know how to run away. It's, you know, as well. Sometimes, you know, running away, and it's not cowardice, and it's a strategic retreat.
It is, yeah. I think that's a huge thing, is like knowing when to give something up. I think is probably one of the best like strategies actually in life, because sometimes you can just, you know, relentlessly pursue something just because, I initially started it off, when sometimes it can just be like, it's meant to bring you to a certain point and then you're meant to cut it off and get rid of it.
Oh boy, but that could be the hardest thing in the world for people. You need to have invested all this time and energy and you know, effort into this, and you're telling me to walk away now. You know how difficult that is for most people, for like anybody. But yeah, that's what you do, because you know, you've got to kind of, you know, create an effigy of yourself and burn it every so often.
You do, absolutely. You have to constantly, basically it's like you're constantly shedding.
Yeah.
You're never fixing into like an identity as who you are. You're
not going to get in the doll inside, you know, the Russian dolls, you know, where you have one inside the other. You're not going to get into the next one unless you take off the old one. It's just like that, you know. It's the same kind of idea. Same kind of idea.
So if people are listening to this now and say they've kind of, which a lot of people will, because I'll be putting this into my group, Energy is Your Currency community, where I think a lot of people who are really on their own quest, their own health journey, their own kind of journey of consciousness. A lot of people, I suppose, have seen the world in the way it is at the moment, or whatever we want to say, if that's the current story that you want to buy into. But I think people are really kind of looking for, I suppose, just inspiration as to how to progress in their own journey. Like, because obviously your area really is in like the development of consciousness and tapping into creativity. Like you have many facets to you. So kind of like, what kind of message would you give to somebody like that, who's kind of coming out of that whole like, oh yeah, that's the story, I don't want to buy into it anymore, but I want to direct my energy now on my own path, my own unique path?
First thing you've realized is that change comes from within, never from without.
Okay.
It's a self-made process. It grows like a seed from inside you every single time, right?
Yeah.
Secondly, you have to get in touch with the creative forces inside you. And I find, now when I say creative, I don't just necessarily talk about artistic, it could be business or anything, right? The greatest conduit for that is to stop focusing your attention on things you can't change. So don't watch TV and don't watch the TV news. If you do, just comment on it and have a laugh at it. See the absurdity of it, but don't like put any kind of emotional capital into it. That immediately frees up enormous amounts of energy, and ferocious amounts of energy are released just by doing that one thing. The other thing is the other thing is not having any fixity on the outcome of anything. So, for instance, if your desire is something, don't be obsessed with it getting that absolute finite result. Because one thing I've discovered about like these kinds of processes is that they often unfold in very poetic or even, you know, kind of ways. They don't, you know, you could say something like, you know, this is like, you know, the black magic thing. You know, you could say, I want to make $1 million. I want €1 million. I want €1 million, right? And you send that out to the universe. You make a sigil, or you make a talisman, or whatever, and you put it out there. And then you might be hit by a car and get left paralyzed, and you win it. You get $1 million insurance. You know, you have to be very careful with these things. You can't just, you know. So you have to be very careful, because there's the, you know, this stuff is like when you enter into this kind of casino of consciousness, you know, you've got to be really canny, and you've got to be really careful. That's why I always tell people, like, keep your objectives modest, very, very modest. You know, And you will find that they will start to come. And if they go wrong, they won't go horrifically wrong. You know, so you've got to always be conscious. You've got to be very kind of frugal in what your desires are. Communication with nature is absolutely, I can't stress it enough. Get in there into the woods, go to the beach, just get out there and lose yourself in nature. There's nothing that's so important, because then you will realize you're part of the natural cycle of things. And there is a kind of an underlying intelligence to all this, and you're part of it, it's part of you. And that's it. That's very, very important for me. And then the next thing is, I'm very interested in ancient history, mythology. I practically live in megalithic sites at this point in my life. I do crazy things. I travel around Europe. I sleep inside these chambers and stuff. And I just want to know what the people of the past were like. Were they like us? Were they like us? And I found but that's just me. That's my path. That doesn't have to apply to anyone else. Another person's could be surfing. It could be painting. That's just me at the moment, the stage of my life. That's been a phenomenal thing for me. And also a very important one is have no gurus. Be your own guru. Don't have people who inspire you.
Yeah.
Very important. Like, oh, I really like what she says. I like what he says. And that's the end of it. Don't follow them. Don't follow them. And always be prepared to know that you're going to be wrong. You're going to make huge mistakes. And then say, okay, it's a learning process. I know that's the mistake from now on. It's really quite easy. It's like you just let it happen. You just, you don't, the resistance is the thing that really causes the problems. When you have an element of resistance to these forces, the bigger the force, the greater the resistance, you found out. The less the force. And also maintain your sense of humor. I can't stress that enough. I spend most of my day laughing and telling jokes and looking at comedy videos. And that just has kept making, I just have so much fun. I just love stuff like that. Do you remember when we did the stand-up comedy show in Dublin?
Oh my God, that was actually one of the best weekends of my life. I had such a laugh. It was brilliant.
Yeah, it was great. It was like, it was just so much fun.
We're all taking the piss out of ourselves. Yeah, it was brilliant.
Yeah, it was brilliant. It was great. And it was so, you were talking about Waylands. That was in Waylands. And you walked out of that. Think of how you walked out of there that night compared to when you walked out of the other night you were talking about.
Oh my gosh, like literally.
There was the answer right there and then.
That was it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And that's actually kind of an element of what we're going to be bringing in, my mom and I, because we actually have possibly we do have very zany, insane senses of humor. My mom and I, we do like little skits the whole time. So we have little puppets that we're going to do a little puppet show with, and bring it into a really high tempo of just complete madness and humor. And the whole we're going to basically put our journey through the puppets.
I was just thinking about that comedy gig that we did. We walked out in front of a packed house with you know what I mean? We really threw ourselves out there, and nobody failed that. Not one of us failed that night. And that place was packed to the rafters when we went out that night, when we did that. And there was people there that would have torn us apart if we weren't funny. And every single one of us had everybody in stitches. That was amazing when you think about that. It was it was such a powerful experience in that regard. Yeah.
And it was such a teacher as well, actually, because when you kind of look at it back at it and see from this perspective of the fact that it's almost like, again, I think something with, I don't know, there's something magical about humor. It's like you can tell people different things, you can put stories into it, but it's almost like it's not hitting them, because it's a different energy. It's a much higher band, isn't it, of being able to.
Yeah, it's like mythology or music. It targets the subconscious mind. That's more powerful. It's like we have fairy tales and folklore for that specific reason, because they act as repositories of inside the psyche. They're inside the lower poles of consciousness. This is why, if you look at fairy tales, right? Now, they're quite dark. They're very dark. They warn about things like pedophiles and murderers and rapists, but they're not told like that, because they would terrorize children. So they're wolves, they're, Hansel and Gretel, they're, this kind of thing. They're dragons, they're witches. But you remember those stories for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
and they don't traumatize you. And this is why our ancestors developed mythology in order to teach us how to deal with
Mm-hmm.
the slings and arrows of life, but not to go, oh God, life is shit, I'm going to be torn to pieces. You know,
Yeah.
they're going
Yeah.
to die. You know, the Woody Allen kind of mentality. No,
Exactly.
it's to make you aware, but not make you in terror.
Yeah.
And that's
Exactly.
that. So humor is great for that. You know, like that's why like firemen and men in the military and people who have to deal with very stressful situations. They're all telling jokes after the most horrific events. They're laughing
Mm-hmm.
about it, not
Yeah.
because they're cold or dead inside or anything.
Yeah.
It's because that's the healing mechanism. That's the
Oh, that's
healing
interesting.
mechanism.
Yeah, because actually, I remember years back, I actually worked for a time as a nursing assistant in a psychiatric hospital, and basically that was obviously very dark and quite traumatic to be in that experience. But I actually had one of the best times with the staff, like say outside the ward, before we'd go in. We had like literally, it was like a laugh a minute. It was like an actual comedy show. Like honestly, it was
Yeah.
probably one of the funniest experiences I've had. And then to go into that was obviously, I didn't realize at the time, but that's obviously what your psyche has to do, doesn't it, to be able to.
Well, psychiatric hospitals are extremely dark places, and I don't mean that to put down people
Oh
involved in
yeah.
the mental health care
Yeah.
profession. But it's
Mm.
like there's you're dealing with people who are. I mean, I often think the worst place in the world to send a person who's sick is a psychiatric hospital, unless they're dangerous,
Yeah.
because there's not because there's anything. There's lots of wonderful people involved in that, but nobody ever seems to last in that business
Mm.
in that field.
Yeah.
Without being damaged themselves, and that's because there's all kinds of issues with corrupted psyches, and I know this is going to sound stupid to people, but there's like entities that swarm upon these places and stuff, and they
Mm.
can affect the
Yeah.
staff, and they
Yeah.
like anyone who's worked in those places will tell you they all saw very strange or had very bizarre experiences
Mm.
from
Definitely.
the patients are basically empty vessels for these like other forms of consciousness to like raid, and it's they're not safe places in any way.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. And it's but yeah, that was just an interesting kind of observation as to how the humor was very, very helpful. But
Yeah, black humor is white
black
magic.
humor. Yeah. Oh
Is
yeah,
white
that's
magic.
interesting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, I think this is going to really help people listening to this, because I know, like, when I listened back to you, and it was so funny because I remember actually was laughing my head off because you were like, people are actually watching nature documentaries. Would they not just go off into nature? I was actually like, that was actually one of the funniest things I've ever heard. I was like, oh my God, that is actually hilarious. Like, but it's so
I
true.
know.
It's so insane. It's like, let's all just watch nature documentaries inside. Like, we need to get out and we need to be wild, and we need to be
Yeah.
in the earth. That's actually, I always say that, it's like that's my medicine. It's actually being by the beach, walking into the water and the woods, everything. I actually, like, I have to do that. I actually cannot maintain myself without having that in my regular routine.
If you live in Ireland and you don't do it, there's something shame on you,
Yeah,
because we live in the most beautiful country in the world,
yeah,
one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and here we are. If you're not out there, drinking that in, you
mm,
don't deserve to live here. That's the way I feel about it.
absolutely, yeah. So before we finish off today, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up our conversation?
My website is thomassheridanarts.com.
Mm-hmm.
My other website is streetdruid.net. I've got a book called The Druid Code, which kind of like deals very heavily with consciousness and stuff like that
Okay.
in terms of the history of Ireland. And
Yeah.
it's getting I just got like a big write up in the Australian magazine New Dawn. They gave me a huge feature by Greg Moffat over two things. I'm
Mm-hmm.
off to America. If anyone's listening over there, I'm going to be in Houston in mid-September, and possibly in Portland, Seattle, and Olympia in October. So look out for that. It'll be on my website.
Okay.
And I've got a book I've signed a new publishing deal, so I've got another book coming out, which really might interest your things. It's going
Yeah.
to be on a philosophical approach to magic and the occult, which will deal with it in a philosophical kind of way rather
Yeah.
than an actual, a practice way. Although that will be included in it as well.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's really, really fascinating. Yeah. So we'll include all the links to that anyway for people to check you out.
Oh
And,
yeah, and and check out my
yeah.
open source occult TV channel on YouTube. I'm making documentaries and films there. Open
Okay.
source occult TV, one word. on YouTube.
Okay. Well, you've given people a lot to explore anyway, and they can look at all your different channels. And another thing, just before we finish, are you going to be doing tours, like are you going to do like tours of different sites and stuff like that? Is that something that you're planning to do?
Oh yeah, very good. Yeah, I forgot it. Well, it hasn't been officially announced yet, but we're going. Myself and a lady called Maria Wheatley, who's very big in England. She's into the whole earth energies and things like that. She's probably like one of the world's experts on it. And we kind of met last year, and we went to through another project we were working on. We went to Malta, we went to Sardinia, and we decided. So we want to do a tour of Ireland next year. It'll be around May, April, Beltane, Valpurgis night type. Will be a 7-day tour of Ireland, staying in castles mostly, and visiting it'll be like a big deal, and visiting all the megalithic sites. I'll be given the folklore and the magic, and as well as like loads of other side trips. She'll be doing the earth energies and all that kind of thing, as well as her own insight in the megaliths, and me entertaining you on the bus and things like that. So it should be good fun.
That sounds because I was just thinking, God, that would be ideal, because it's like, I think it's almost, it's just, there's like a craving now for pursuing things that are real and like really nourish you like completely deeply, as opposed to just going through life on a very superficial level. I think once you kind of undergo this process yourself, the old style doesn't you're like, oh my gosh, going to a pub and doing these kind of things is just like doesn't cut it. You want to go into more.
Well, the world is gigantic and human experience is immense. Why would you want to narrow your bandwidth down to like what everyone else is doing? I mean, anyone can be ordinary.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, thanks so much, Thomas, for your time. And I've really enjoyed our conversation today, and I hope everyone else does. And we'll include all of your links anyway. So we'll send people your way to find out all your interesting endeavors and your new book. So what's that called? The philosophical approach?
No, the new book is The Druid Code. The next book I'll give you a world exclusive here. The next book is going to be called The Invocation of Strangeness.
Oh, wow. The Invocation of Strangeness. Amazing.
Yeah.
So I'll have to check out The Druid Code to begin with anyway, and I'll be looking out for your next book then.
Okay, Ashton. Thanks for having me, Sean. Delighted to be on here, and best of luck with your podcast and everything.
Thanks a million.
Bye-bye.